My name is Miljan Trulov. I am the Vice President, Dean of Admission and Financial Aid. And I want to, in a moment, I'll let our faculty presenters introduce themselves. But I want to start off and let you all know for this particular session, I'm going to be the person to take your questions. So while John and Ellen are discussing and having a conversation, if you have questions, shoot those out to me. You can chat me privately, and I will send you all a message so you know exactly who to chat your questions to. You can chat your questions at any time, and I'm going to send those either directly to John or to Ellen. I'll tell them both what your questions are. And so without further ado, John and Ellen, I'll let you take it away.
Hi, my name's Ellen Millender. Welcome to Faculty Office Hours. I am chair of the Department of Classics, and I teach Greek and Latin at all levels. I'm the ancient historian at Reed, and I also teach in Humanities 110.
Yep. Hi, I'm John Rourke. I teach in the economics department. I have been here now 10 years, I think. And I teach primarily the theory classes in econ, but I also do game theory, and I'm a tax economist is what I study. So I have a whole bunch of different ranges, but we can get into that in a little bit. You want to do more, talk about classics a little bit, Ellen, and then we'll...
So first of all, I have to tell you, so my specialty, I work on ancient Sparta. I'm a Greek historian, and in honor, I'm wearing my Sparta sweatshirt. And I beat John. I've been here for almost 18 years. So a long time. And we're very happy to have you here today.
Very good. Do you want to talk about classics a little bit, kind of just things to think, and then I'll talk about econ and kind of... Okay. We got an interesting thing here. We've got two majors that are about as far apart as you could possibly imagine. I think in some ways it's really cool because we have the ability to kind of show you kind of different ways that different sorts of disciplines work at Reed. But at the same time, what I like about the two is that econ's very accessible, I think, in some ways. And so it's good to be able to kind of talk how classics works, how we work, and kind of see kind of that sort of dynamic. So I'll let you start, Ellen, because I can
one of the other things I'd like to point out, and John knows this, that some of my favorite students in my ancient history classes have been econ majors who took a number of classes with me. So there has been some interesting overlap. So classics at Reed has two tracks. So the traditional track is called Greek and Latin. And the way that track works for the major, you take 3 years of one language, ancient Greek or ancient Latin, and then you take 1 year of the other language. Usually our students do more than that. You also have to do 2 other courses in the department within archaeology or ancient history. And in addition to that, we have a junior qual. We can talk about that at some point if you have questions about the qual. Every department has what we call a qualifying exam. In classics, it is literally writing a long research paper, about 20 pages in length, for a course in your junior year, which we believe then sets you up for the senior thesis. And the only other requirements in the department would be senior thesis, which counts as 2 classes. So that's one line. And then a number of years ago, we hired an archaeologist. We're very happy about that. And we started a new line in classics, which is called HAM, not ham. I always joke it's HAM. It's the History and Archaeology of the Ancient Mediterranean. And that involves students taking at least 2 years in one language in classics, and then taking an array of courses in classics and in allied departments. So archaeology, history, allied departments, art history, anthropology, religion, history, etc. And again, doing a junior qual and then senior thesis. So it's a course that's more focused on history and archaeology with less language work. But again, a lot of the students who've already done this major have decided they like the ancient language. They've done more work than we've asked them to do. And then senior thesis, just quickly, classics is an inherently interdisciplinary major. We have seniors do all manner of topics, ancient medicine, history, archaeology, theater, philosophy, lit, lang, you name it. So my student this year is thesising with me on marriage in Homer's Odyssey. And it's spectacular. So if you have questions about theses, please do not hesitate to ask. John, I'll send it to you.
All right, so I guess I'll talk about econ since we're a little different.
Little.
One, well, just itsy bitsy, right? Yeah. So the thing about econ at Reed that's a little unique is that if you talk to other schools, they usually do this intro micro one semester, intro macro the next semester. So you kind of get stuck the first year doing a lot of intro courses. And the way those are usually designed is that you can either do macro or micro in any order. And so there's a lot of like repetition that happens between those two courses. So it takes a while before you can kind of jump up into the fun stuff. At Reed, we do something slightly different, which is we do an intro course, R201, which is a combination course of intermediate level micro and intro macro. Why we do that is twofold. One, we find y'all get bored real quickly if we end up doing too much intro econ. Second, it allows us to kind of jump into the fun stuff. And given everything that's going on right now, there's going to be a lot of fun stuff to kind of study in the next couple of years in econ. So by having this one intro course, it allows you to jump into basically everything else. The way the econ major is designed is it's incredibly flat. So you take this intro 201 course, and then everything else is available to you having taken that course in our major. So there's no, if you notice the way the numbers work kind of in general, there's like a 100, 200, 300, 400, and that's pretty common across all schools. The 100 is usually for like first years, or I know nothing about this material and I'm just going to start flat out basic. So you think of like Math 111, which is intro to calculus. You think of, Latin 110, intro to Latin. So the 100s tend to be those intro sort of courses. The 200s tend to be sophomore level courses, and then the 300s tend to be junior, senior level courses. And that's a normal way those numbers work kind of universally across the different universities. For us in econ, our intro is a 200 level. So even though you're a first year, we don't care. Jump right in. Let's go. And then you are able to, if you were to take econ in your, in the fall, you're able to take a 300 level junior senior course in your second semester of your first year, which is pretty powerful. And what that allows you to do is really get into the fun stuff. So we're going to have, courses in macro where we can talk about what's going on in the economy. We're going to have courses in public finance where we talk about the role of the government in the economy. We've got all sorts of stuff that we can kind of talk about that's going to be fun that you can jump right in and do, and that a lot of first years actually do all the time. So that's really fun. From a thesis standpoint, econ, this is always one that always bothers people. Like, what can you do? And just kind of like Ellen said, all sorts of things. We do all sorts of weird things too. I'm going to give you kind of what my students are doing this year. So I've got one student looking at gentrification in Portland and trying to study that. I've got one person looking at the role of taxation and crime rates, which is kind of an interesting sort of thing. I've got one looking at tuition reciprocity agreements between states and whether or not that causes people to go from Oregon to Washington to go to college, something like along those lines. And then the more interesting one, which gets people kind of psyched and kind of lets you know that like you can really think crazy, is I have somebody basically who spent the last semester creating a virtual economy based on loot boxes for you video gamer types. And he's doing a loot box video game thesis, trying to see whether or not if I actually announced the probabilities beforehand and what type of loot you could potentially win in your loot box, are you more likely to go and buy the loot box or not? And so he's done all sorts of things. It's an interesting thesis. It's built on one that somebody did a couple of years ago on Team Fortress 2, where they were, the thing with the hats, where you were searching for hats. She turned that thesis into a job at Riot Games. And her job now is to actually run all the video gaming stuff in Korea, China, and Australia. So she runs all the online video gaming aspects now. And so we suspect that she is very interested in this person who's doing this new thesis, so on. So we've had a lot of like weird sort of like video gaming theses, which are kind of weird, which is kind of interesting because the whole virtual fake economy sort of stuff and what's going on there. So it's to give you a sense that the thesis is a big deal for everybody, and it's this big kind of big final project, the kind of the capstone piece of your career here. But you've got a lot of leverage and latitude over what you want to do with that. It goes all over the place. And you have the same sort of stuff in classics, right? You guys do, as you said, you do kind of pretty much everything too.
Oh, pretty much everything. So I'll just give you some of the other topics this year. We have someone who's working on this 4th century CE Christian martyr text, where the person has taken bits of Virgilian poetry and literally created patterns to then create Christian text using ancient text. No, we have students who are all over the place. And the beauty of thesis, usually when people hear about thesis, John will agree with me here, they get very frightened because they can't imagine the idea of a senior thesis. And I always tell them, you're not writing a senior thesis when you get to read. I like to think of the thesis as something, as a gift, in the sense that you have a whole year to work on something you love, and meeting with a professor, every week to work on something as almost a collaborator on something you love. And I think that is a tremendously exciting experience. And I would say students, I've been at Reed a really long time, students generally feel great after it may not always be fun during it, but they absolutely value having had that experience.
So the couple of people who are coming in late, just so that you're aware of what's going on, if you have any questions at all, what we're asking is that you private chat them to Miljan, who's the Dean of Admissions, and you can kind of find him on the side there. But if you private chat questions to him, he'll forward them and kind of get them all together and kind of send them to us, and we can kind of go forward from there.
But we have questions.
Yeah, otherwise, we can talk forever because we're good at it. But if you have stuff you want to know, by all means, kind of fire away, even if they're silly. We can do that sort of stuff. And as you've also noticed, kind of we've forced the mute on people only because as we've started teaching online, the one thing we've noticed is that people have cats and dogs and other people and parents who all of a sudden walk in the room and start screaming and yelling in the background, and then you get all this noise and you're like, what is going on? And so to save you the embarrassment of mom and dad walking in the room and doing something to you, we just went this way. It works a little easier.
That's my house. My house, I feel like the kitchen is like a train station, and that's where I've been doing all my teaching. So
you've been doing it in the kitchen?
Yes, because every other room has been taken, and I'm in the kitchen. Do you love that? And then everyone comes in and makes coffee or starts talking. And my cat keeps coming in when I'm teaching as well. So, but it's not helping his Greek and his Latin. He's not really doing very well. Anyway.
Your cat's Greek and Latin?
My cat, I've been trying. He's just not very talented,
So I have a great question from one of our guests.
Yeah.
How can one know if classics is a good major if you've never taken it in high school?
Oh, okay. That's a great question. And listen, I mean, how many people take classics in high school, right? It's really, really unusual. And I would say the majority of our students, really the majority of them, come to Reed never having had any classics. These are students who may like reading myth, or they like again, Sparta, like they might like the 300. I'm a Sparta person. But it's a very easy major to get into. And as I said, really 95% of our majors come with nothing. And so what does that mean? It means that if you come to Reed, and I hope you will, you meet with me or one of my colleagues, and we would sit down and talk to you about how to put a schedule together. And what that typically would mean is starting with one of the ancient languages, either ancient Greek or ancient Latin. But I don't want anybody thinking that you're at a disadvantage, because really our students, and I'm looking at my senior class now, and they're an incredible senior class. And I think if I'm right, the majority of them came with nothing, and they're spectacular. So no one should feel at a disadvantage for not having taken classics. It's really pretty unusual. First of all, to have Greek is highly unusual. And to have Latin, it's really a shame. We used to get more students, but there's just not as much Latin teaching at the secondary level around the country. Does that answer the question?
I think so. I'm going to do it from the econ standpoint. I'm going to pretend you asked me for econ as well, the same sort of thing. Only because, some of you get experience of doing econ in high school, but it's a very different sort of animal. Econ, traditionally, we have a lot of people who don't even think about econ, don't even take intro econ until their sophomore year. And then all of a sudden they realize, oh, this is cool. And then let me try to figure it out. So we are a major that you can get into late. So if you try some other sorts of things and you're like, oh, that's fun, or I don't like this, let me try econ, and then all of a sudden you discover econ late, by all means, go for it. We have people who, even as late as like the first semester junior year, we've had somebody do this once. And we had a poor chem major who made a decision to change at the last minute, who started in their first semester of their senior year, which was crazy. It can be done. I wouldn't recommend that just because it's a little bit nuts. But we have a lot of flexibility in terms of the way that, because of that way we do that major, where it's that one intro course and everything opens up to you, it allows you to kind of play a little late and discover, ooh, maybe I want to do this. The other thing I'll throw out there too is econ has a minor. And so minors are things that are slowly becoming a thing at Reed. And they've primarily been with the languages for the most part. And I think, and that's true of classics too, right? You have one for Latin and Greek?
We have we have a minor in Latin, and if anyone who wants to know more about it, I can tell you a minor in Greek. They're basically 5 courses, right? Minor in Latin, minor in Greek, and then a minor in Latin and Greek, that one's for students who are coming in with languages.
So we created one in econ just as well, and we're I think we're the only big major that has a minor. And so that gives you some options too. If you decide I want to play with econ, and then you're like, you still have this opportunity to kind of have this minor thing kind of going around as well. Within econ, we have 2 tracks. I didn't mention this either earlier. One is kind of the straightforward kind of, I'm just doing econ and just call me an econ major. We have this thing called quantitative econ, which is more for our math folks who like to geek out on the math. And so it allows you to kind of have those. Generally, that one tends to be more for people who are thinking grad school and they want to go in that route. We've had really good luck in the past, I'd say 3 or 4 years placement in grad school. I'm going to go off on a tangent, don't mind me. But we've placed people in really good places. So in the past 3 years, we've placed people at Harvard, we've placed people at Yale, we've placed people at NYU, we've placed people at Caltech. And we have a lot of people now in econ starting to do what's called a postbac, where you go and be like a research assistant for a couple of years. It's more common in other fields, but econ is starting to become a thing. And so in the past couple of years, we sent people to be RAs at Stanford at the Graduate School of Business. We sent them at Chicago. We sent them to Harvard. And so this year, we're hoping UCLA is on our list and a couple others. So we're doing really well kind of placing on the graduate front. And then on the other side, since I'm kind of doing post-career thing, I might as well throw this out there. The Center for Life Beyond Reed is what would be like career services at other places. But we don't call it that because it's really about trying to get you to think about what do you want out of your life when you're done here. And so it's more of a holistic kind of approach, I think is the way that I would put it, where the person in charge there, Alice Hara, she'll talk to you about like, what do you want out of things? So do you want to work in a group? Do you like being on your own? Do you like 9 to 5? Do you want flexibility at home? Do you want to be able to travel? Do you care about the work? Like, what is it about that you want to do? And then help you figure out what career paths kind of work with that, as opposed to some career places where you go in there and say, I want to be an accountant. Not that you would ever say that at Reed, but I want to do whatever, right? So it's a slightly different sort of approach to that. But in econ, we are really active in part, and I think that's the econ kind of thing. We are really active in kind of making you think about this. So in the department, I'm known as the resume destroyer. And so what I do is I work with everybody and I say, okay, give me your resume, and then I tear it apart to shreds. For everybody who wants, and I say, okay, let's change this so that this works for what you're trying to do. And then we work on it, and then you go to the Center for Life, and then econ and Center for Life work really closely together on doing this sort of thing and work on that. We have programs that allow people, there's a sophomore, for people who are interested in finance, there's a sophomore trip during spring break in your sophomore year, where we send a couple of, I think it's between 5 and 10 students to New York to meet with alumni who are working on Wall Street and to learn about finance. So even if you have no idea what that is, we do that and teach you. We have a course in Paideia, which we can talk about, which is all about finance. So it's a 3-day course to learn about what the heck is this and I'm about to go do on this spring break trip. And then there's money there not only to send you on these trips, but there's money there to do things like, how do I dress for this sort of thing? How do I do this? How do I do this? And so there's a lot of sort of funding for that. In fact, there's a lot of funding for all sorts of things that we can talk about later, research, internships, all sorts of things. But like I say, I'm going off on tangents just a little bit, but I tend to do that.
Please ask us questions. That's why we're here.
But I can keep going. Oh, you got one?
Miljan, do you have, I see one there. Can I answer this?
You
Okay,
should,
does my advisor have to be in the same major? Well, usually, you know, and again, Miljan, if I'm correct, when you guys come to Reed, typically they will try to match you up with somebody. When you say on your application, I want to, I'm thinking about classics or I'm thinking about econ, they would like to match you up with someone in that department. But what I'll tell you is over the years, I've had students who, I don't know if it's ever happened in econ, but it certainly happened in other departments where they want to keep me as their advisor for as long as they can, right? And I'll sometimes say, well, I can't help you with econ. I don't know what to do. but it's perfectly fine if you end up with someone like me and you decide, let's say you come in and you say, I'm interested in classics, and then for some utterly bizarre reason, you decide you want to do economics. And I'm just teasing John here, but if you decide you want to do economics, that's fine. And what I would say is, look, I can look through and I'm a good advisor. I can go through and say, this is, we have a handbook which will help me say to you, typically, this is what a sophomore in econ will do. But I'll say, you know what? I still think it'd be a great idea for you to switch to John or to switch to somebody in John's department. But no, but I mean, typically it's, it's good for you, eventually you are going to have your advisor in your department. But also remember, a lot of students come in to read, and I this is really key, not knowing what they want to do. I have my younger daughter is a first year at Emory, and it sometimes panics her that she's still not completely sure what she wants to do. And frankly, that's the beauty of a liberal arts college education, right? That you can come in and you try things, and you may decide you love econ, or you may decide you love psychology, right? And not to fear trying things. And whatever you write to us, or on your, whatever you write in to read on your admissions materials, you haven't signed away your baby or written something in blood, okay? You could say, by the time you come to read, you could say, gee, I'm not really interested in French anymore, or I'm really not interested in bio. And students come in and they change their majors all the time. That is normal. That is an absolutely normal thing. And in fact, I think it's great. I think college is where your mind is opened. There are all kinds of things you've never learned before. Like I think of all the kids who've come in, like as I said earlier, who've never done classics. Classics has never been on their radar, or maybe econ's never been on their radar. And suddenly they discover this and they like, why do you think John and I are where we are? I went to Brown and I took an ancient history class, and I left and I called my parents and I said, I want to be a Greek historian. That was my third day in college. What a weirdo I am, right? Okay, some people it takes longer, but the point is that at Reed, you get exposed to all kinds of things, and your advisor will help you try to come up with a schedule where you can keep things in play as you're experimenting and trying things.
So one thing that's going to happen is that if you come to Reed, you're going to get a form over the summer that says, what do you think might actually be your like things that you're interested in? And so you'll have three choices that you put down there. And what the college tries to do whenever possible is to match you with one of those three, if they can. And some departments are just, there's too many people. There's amazing how many people come and say they want to do psychology. Or come and say they want to do biology or something, and there's just way too many, in which case we spread them out. But what happens is that, the faculty also talk to each other. So if I get somebody who wants to do classics, it's usually going to be the other way, where Ellen's going to get somebody to do econ. But if I have somebody who wants to do classics, and I'm like, I don't know, what do I do? While you're in the office with me trying to ask questions about what do I do with Latin and Greek, I get Ellen on the phone and say, what do we do?
Yes.
And to make sure, and Ellen does the same thing. So Ellen knows more about the econ major because of the classics people she has who want to try to take econ. So there's a lot of this back and forth. I have a colleague in religion who I constantly work with back and forth. I have students who want to take religion classes. She has students who want to take econ classes. How do we do this? And so it's not unusual for me to call up anybody in any department. I've done music, I've done anthropology, and I'm like, what does this mean when I read the book? What does this mean? And they'll tell me. So that's not an issue. The one thing I will say about the advisor is that the way we kind of think about the advisor is that you can go back and forth. If you have an advisor when you come here and you're like, nope, this ain't working, you know what? Switch.
Yeah,
Find
by
somebody
the way,
else.
absolutely.
Yeah, so it's common to find people and say, you know what, I'm switching. This is not working for me. Great, you are not stuck. And we make it really easy for you to break up, as I like to call it, which is you just go to the new person says, I'm taking you, and then you just magically disappear off the radar of the other person.
And by the way, I've had students who say, do you think my advisor is going to be hurt? And I said, no, I really think they'll be okay. They will recover. Okay.
But at the end of the day, the whole thing about advising at Reed is to make sure that it works for you. Like it's not supposed to work for us. It's supposed to work for you. And the one thing I always say to my advisees when I have them is that my number one job is to advocate for you for what you need. And you have to tell me what that is. And then we will work around it. So is it all of a sudden you want to go study abroad. Okay, let's figure out how to do that. How do I work around this course where me and this professor are having, okay, let's talk about how to do that. How do I get a job? Okay, we'll talk about that. Mom and dad are driving me nuts about X and Y. Okay, here's how we talk. Like, you name it, we do it. So part of my job is to advocate for you in the advising role.
So there was another question. Can I take this one, John? It was about classics. The question was, how applicable, relevant is classics on both professional level and in a holistic liberal arts perspective kind of way? Okay, so that's two parts. So first of all, if you're really thinking about graduation, so what I will tell you is our department, we send some people on to grad school, but really what I'm going to say is that the majority of our students go on to do a whole bunch of different things. So one of the things that we've done, remember John mentioned the Office of Life Beyond Read. So we now have a meeting at the beginning of the year where we introduce our students, all of our juniors and our seniors and all of our students who come to this one meeting, to the people in Life Beyond Read. And we're also doing something now where we're bringing back graduates every year in a whole variety of fields to talk about how a classics degree helped them. And I'm talking about people who are lawyers. And I have one former student who works at Morgan, not Morgan, oh, come on. The big bank in New York. I'm sounding
Morgan
like
Stanley.
Morgan, yes, okay. And he's on like the Asia desk, okay. I have students who are accountants. I have students who work in library science. I have a student who's working in Washington on human trafficking. Okay, we have students. So what I would say is this, when students ask me why a classics major, what I usually say to them is you can really major in lots of things at Reed that will give you important skills. So if I were to say as a classicist, what are the skills you learn as a classicist? One, you become an excellent writer. You become an excellent reader, and you become really an excellent an analyst, right? Because when someone works very closely on ancient languages, you're doing really close textual analysis. So this is true from when I went to college, and this is still true today. A lot of classics people go in to become management consultants and become analysts because they have those skills. And someone might say, well, can you get those from history? Can you get those from English? You have to remember that a lot of majors at Reed are going to give you, they're going to give you, I would say a number of majors may give you the same set of skills. You become a great reader at Reed. You become a stronger writer at Reed. You learn how to analyze text. You learn how to work in groups. One of the things that I think is great about classics, and I think gives classics, if I have to say this, I have to say this for my field, an edge is that we're interdisciplinary. So you literally gain so many different perspectives because you're looking at a world from the perspective of what? The language these people speak, the literature that they wrote, the philosophy, the way that their brains work philosophically, historically. We look at material remains. So I think classics creates very nimble thinkers. And in terms of it being a holistic liberal arts perspective, I don't think you get much more holistic. I mean, Reed, as I said, we do so much under the umbrella of one department. So for example, I have a sophomore who wants to write on, she really is a political theorist, and she's going to end up writing a senior thesis with me, even though she's a political theorist and I'm not a political theorist, I'm a historian. I've published, some of my work is on political theory. So she will work with me. So classics has a huge umbrella, and I think that's one of the reasons why I think it's an attractive major. Does that answer the question for whoever asked?
Can I tackle that first?
Always ask if I'm not clear, you want more information.
Let me tackle that first part a little more, because there's a question about the practical aspect of classics, and I want to push back against that a little bit, only from the standpoint of this. At the end of the day, you need to be happy with what you're doing.
Yes.
And if you're not happy, you're not going to do well.
Mm-hmm.
And if happy means you're going to be a classicist, because that's what I really love, Reed is going to have enough courses and enough other things where you are going to be able to do the practical things you want to do. So do not worry about the major choice as kind of blocking or forming paths. You can get where you want to go in a bunch of different majors. Yeah. And I've told people over and over, because econ gets the opposite problem, which is, well, econ's a real major, right? Because like that's the one you go for jobs, right? So we get that a lot, but people are miserable. Like their dream is to be in
Not because of
anthropology.
John, by the way. Not because
Huh?
of me.
Yeah. So I've had students who like their dream is to do anthropology, but
Yes.
they're getting pressure to do econ, and I'm like, well, you know what? Econ you're doing miserable at. You're not happy. Why are you here? Go do anthropology, and you're going to do so much better, and then you're going to be able to kind of gather more information, be able to gather more skills that way. Whereas you're sitting there going, why am I listening to a utility pump? Why am I listening to this? This is boring. I don't care about money. All this sort of stuff. And so I always have these conversations with students all the time to make sure, and this is part of the Brown philosophy that both Ellen and I were both undergraduates at Brown at completely different times. We didn't overlap at all. But one of the philosophies there was also be happy. And so I think, that permeates a lot of the way that we think through the college, because there's a lot of us be happy folks. And just think that through when you're thinking about majors, that don't worry so much about the practical side. Read will get you there. And once you kind of know that sort of where you want to go, like we can design anything to kind of augment onto a major, anything that you need. But from econ, from an econ standpoint, the practical side I think is a little more straightforward.
Yeah.
We do place obviously a lot of people in grad school. We place a lot of people in internships that turn into things like the Federal Reserve. So I have a student who is going to be at the Federal Reserve in Philadelphia next year working. I have other students who do work for the city of Portland afterwards. They do management consulting. We're very excited because Bain has now decided that we're going to be a place that they're going to recruit. That's a big deal because it's usually only the Ivies in like Northwestern and Stanford, but they're opening a branch in Seattle, and so they started recruiting with us last year, which is pretty exciting. We have relationships with a couple of different consulting firms, so that works really well too. And then we have other people who do things like we have somebody who runs a chocolate farm, but understands how to read the numbers and understands how to like look at market projections and be able to sit there and say, hey, this is how I should, it's time to be making Easter bunnies now or whatever. And so she's been really happy working in that sort of thing. We have one student who ran a travel magazine. That's her thing that she wants to do. I already talked about the video game person who runs video gaming. And so we place people in all sorts of kind of weirdo kind of things that do, but because we have a skill set where we teach them certain skills, it allows them to go into a whole bunch of difference. So
same. We also have someone who is now very prominent in game design. He loves narrative, and being a classicist, right? Really, really helped him. So I'm looking up. So what other questions do you guys have? And it doesn't have to just be about classics and econ. It can be anything about read. Okay, we've both been here a lot.
Let me ask you this, Ellen. Then.
Yeah.
What's the best thing about teaching here?
So I will tell you the best thing about teaching at Reed, and I can say this, I've taught at 3 different institutions. I'm not naming the other 2, okay? Reed students, and I really say this, I say this from the absolute bottom of my heart, Reed students are an absolute joy to teach because the students I've had at Reed almost routinely are here because they really have a love of learning, seriously. Do you know how few times in my career students have actually asked me about their grades? Whereas at other institutions, I had students who were literally like clawing at the door to find out how they were doing. So students are really academically engaged, remarkably supportive of each other. And what really amazes me, it's not the capacity to do a lot of work. That's not, to me, the issue. It's the engagement that students have. And if I can just give one example, and John will realize what a crazy department I have. So the first year, a long time ago now, when I was first chair of my department, and I was so proud of myself for putting our schedule together, and like an idiot, I double scheduled myself. So I literally scheduled 2 of my classes where there was a 10-minute overlap. And I'm embarrassed. So what did I do? I had to start my earlier class at 8:30 in the morning. And I know you're all going, oh my God, but 8:30 in the morning at college is like death, okay? And this is an advanced Greek class on a historian named Herodotus. And I thought this is going to be a nightmare. And honest to God, it was probably one of the best classes I've ever taught. Just to give you, I'm sitting in my office, and the classroom was right down the hall, and I hear 3 of the students running down the hall going, that was the coolest article I have ever read. This is at 8:20 in the morning, okay? There's no way I would have ever experienced that anywhere. And that's why at Reed, even teaching remotely, I am still absolutely loving it because I love my students. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, and I guess for me, what I would say is Reed allows me to do 2 things. It allows me to geek out and be okay, and that it's cool to be okay interested in my academics. Some other places you're going to have to hide that because you have to hide it behind the baseball team or other sorts of things or whatever. And I feel I can just be out front and dorky at times what I want. And so I'm a tax economist. I can dork out about changes to the tax code. When we did the tax reform last year, like I was teaching, like that was fun. I could teach it. So I can be really geeky in that sort of way, which is fun. But the other thing is that the students let me experiment with things in the classroom, and I can try all sorts of weird things, and we'll see if it works or not. So I teach game theory. Game theory is all about strategy. It's about the math behind it, but it's really about, I'm going to interact with you in some sort of way. How do I figure out what you're going to do, and what's my best response to you? And then if I know I'm going to do this and you're going to do right. So we start thinking about this. So it's about mathematical modeling. So I took a chance the first year I taught this course, and I was like, I'm going to board game in the middle of my class. So I just bring board gaming in. And so now it's morphed into this thing where we board game once a week. And the idea is that when you play board games, you're doing strategy against other players. It's very strategic in that sort of way. And it's a very sort of way of taking the mathematical sort of stuff that we're doing in class and putting it into something practical and tangible and kind of ways that we can do this. And what I do over time is I make the games more and more complicated. So you start from like a tic-tac-toe sort of level, and we move up into something a lot more complicated. And by the end, the students are able to try to figure out 2 steps ahead, 3 steps ahead, 4 steps ahead, and they're doing it all in the gaming sort of thing. And then when we talk about how you do it in the modeling, they're like, oh, this is like this, 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 and it kind of made everything come together. I would never in a million years take that chance anywhere else, because it is really a risk. If it blows up in my face, it's like, well, maybe it will. But it really didn't. But I also knew that if it did blow up in my face, the students, A, would tell me that it blew up in my face. B, we'd have a conversation of what were you trying to accomplish with this? And C, why don't you try this? And let's see if this works. So I really feel, READ is very collaborative in that sort of way. It's not me just being here, professor, doing my thing, and then you all just sitting there absorbing and going, yes, yes, yes. It doesn't work that way. And you'll find that across the board. It is much more of a collaborative effort where we're going to figure out things. And occasionally you're going to be like, I really want to learn X, and I know nothing about X. All right, let's figure it out. And so we tear up the syllabus and we decide we're going to figure out X because half the students want to do X. Like right now, I'm going to have to figure out how to talk about COVID and how to teach about that. And what does it mean to have a depression in the middle of, like, what does this all mean? Like econ's changing right in front of me. So I have to adjust because the students want to do that. And I don't know exactly how to do that yet. And the students are okay with that as long as we're kind of figuring it out together.
Absolutely. And then one of the other things John sort of mentioned in connection is that we support a lot of research, collaborative research. And I'm sure John can talk about that on his end. I've had a number of grants to do research with students. And when I'm talking about research, I'm not talking about students, some kind of lackey, who does things for me. So for example, one of my Hume 110 students from years ago, not a classics major, by the way, this is a major in poly, and then she ended up majoring in poli-sci, but she wrote this really interesting paper for me for me in Hume 110, and I ended up the following year when she was a poli-sci major applying for a grant. We won the grant, and out of this, she and I have given 2 talks, and I am writing, because she's not in the field anymore, but I'm finishing a 70-page article on how this one ancient author, really, I'm basically, and this made me rethink all of my work on this one author about how he views democracy in the ancient world. One of the things I deal with my students is, when do democracies not work? Something we all should be possibly thinking about right now. So that's what's great about READ. It really is collaborative. My classes, and I'm sure John can say the same thing, like I'm teaching a class this semester where I was writing a paper for a conference, which is obviously canceled this summer, but I'm gonna have the conference next summer. But the student discussion about the text actually made me rethink my own thesis about my paper. So READ is just, intellectually, it's a really exciting place, but also I want you to know it's a very supportive place. Students do not fall, if you ever feel worried, you do not fall through the cracks at this place. Like people like John and I talk to each other, and we make sure you do not fall through cracks.
And I guess let me throw out one thing too from econ standpoint. and I think classics does this too, just in different ways, because we're different sizes, which plays into this. But econ is very much aware of the importance of kind of community and making you feel like you have an academic home. And I think a lot of the departments do this. And so we build a lot of community sort of activities. And so in econ, for example, my daughter hosts a cheese night once a semester. She likes to go to, there's a fancy cheese place over in Southeast Portland that she likes to go to. She gets to sample the cheeses, and then she brings it all home, sets up a really nice, pretty little platter, makes little handwritten signs. My daughter's 10, makes little handwritten signs of what each of the cheeses are, and then hosts people. When she was little, when she was like 3 or 4, it was a tea party. And everybody had to dress up formal for it. But now yeah, which is what Tegan did. And now we're more into, she prefers cheese. She loves all sorts of hard.
Can I come?
Yeah, you can come. And so we do this whole sort of thing. So we do that. I host a board game night for econ majors once a month, just for us to get together. The students like to think that they can beat me. They can't. They haven't yet, but they try. They try all the time.
John, my God.
I know. And then even now, like, so now this is like a weird time. Like, so what are we doing? We have happy hour. I'm hosting virtual happy hour every week with majors. And that is now becoming trivia night on top of it, where I'm going to be trivia master and I'm going to see if students can beat me, which will be fun. And last week we had 34 students.
Oh, that's great.
Participate in that, which is crazy, right? But we're known as as a department, that's just the sort of thing that we do. We kind of bond and do that. And a lot of departments do this sort of thing, because if you're not happy in your home, you're not going to be successful in your major. And so we really work on that. It's a particular thing that a lot of us kind of are very concerned about and want to make sure that we do well. And I'm sure classics does similar sort of things.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I know, Milian, you wanted to jump in, right?
Yeah. So I'm gonna. We have a really great question, and it's timely because it's that time of year. But the question is, how do I know if Reed is where I should go to school? And that's a question I get a lot. So I'm hoping I can answer that to give you some insight on my opinion. One of the most challenging things about finding a college is that in many ways you're trying to figure out what this experience is going to be like over the course of 4 years. And when you're thinking about 4 years, it's almost impossible to capture that all in your head. So most people kind of think about that freshman year, that first year you're on a college campus, you're checking out the place, you're understanding better what it's like to have a new roommate, your new classes, your new advisor. One of the things that I really challenge students to do is to not think about just your first year, but to think about your 4th year. Think about you as a senior. And right now you all probably have some top choices, and you can say, all right, let me think about who I am as a senior if I go to Reed. Who am I as a senior if I go to this other school? Who am I as a senior school if I go to my third option? And based on all the information that you hear from colleges about classes, about the atmosphere, that you is going to be slightly different depending on what place you attend. Because there's different paths of learning, there are different experiences. And one might not be better or worse, but you probably have this ideal human being that you want to become when everything is all said and done. Now, that's incredibly hard and it's incredibly challenging, but it forces you to take into consideration all the stuff that you're hearing and all the stuff that you're learning in a much more deep way, and for you to consider it and its impact on you as a human being. Now, that's sort of where you want to end up. Between now and then, there's a few things that you can do to sort of hammer out your questions. The goal of this admission process is to give you all the information you need so you can make an informed decision. So you're here today to listen to John and Ellen because you want to know about majors and you want to understand if this major is going to work for you. There are probably some other things that you want to know about colleges. So you're sitting in your room, jot down the things that you're curious about, and that could be things you're curious about for yourself at particular schools. And then I want you to set up an appointment with your admission counselor and say, these are the types of things I need to cover so I know whether or not your school or other schools are a good fit. Can you help me get this information? They might answer 2, 3, 4 of those for you. And then they might bring in some resources to help you answer those remaining questions. And those resources could be students, it could be faculty members, it could be resources online. But when this is all said and done, our ultimate goal is that you will know everything you need to figure out if this is going to be the right place for you your senior year. So I hope that's helpful, and I'd love to. You're very welcome. So this is my last question since we're at time, and so I'm going to keep it really simple but also really fun. You both have great experience with read. I want you to give me 3 powerful words that describe read. Share those with our students. You only get 3.
3 words. John, I'm gonna let you start.
Oh, of course you are, because you can't speak in only 3 words.
I'm being like so flexible. Like
I know. So the 3 words that describe read.
steal my words, I will be really angry. I'm okay. Yes.
I'm going to say, okay, the 3 words that describe read. I'm going to say curious. Haha. I'm going to say collaborative. And I'm going to say compassionate. I'm going to go with the 3 C's.
Are you going with, that's called, by the way, as a class, that's called assonance, where the sounds begin the same if you're learning ancient poetry.
I thought it was alliteration.
Well, it's also assonance and alliteration. It's because you also had so compassion. Anyway, we can go into this. Okay.
Welcome to read. This happens on a daily basis, you guys. Read is seriously.
So I would say intellectual. I would say, oh my goodness, this was so hard because curious really. And this one is, can I do one word that has hyphens? Out of the box, which I think is completely reasonable.
Legit.
Okay, so out of the box. And I would also say community.
Yeah.
I really would. So there's another C word with alliteration, John. Okay.
I like that. I like those 3 a lot. Well, I want to thank all of our guests for joining us. It was really good mix of classics folks and also econ folks and a few folks with a few different interests. John and Ellen have both kindly offered to answer questions if you have more questions once this is done. And so you can actually email me in the admission office, or you can email your admission counselor and you'll know who that is. And they'll make sure that we get these questions to John and Ellen. But thank you for joining us. And John and Ellen, I'll let you all sign off.
So first of all, it was a pleasure meeting you. I mean, I know it's remote, but please really send any questions. And I've also told Miljan, if students want to get a sense of, I'm hoping we can make this work, of what a Latin or a Greek course would look like. I'm teaching beginning Latin, I'm teaching intermediate Greek, and I'd be more than happy to have anybody join. I've got wonderful students in these classes. And I'm going to tell you this, you'll do great wherever you go, but I will tell you, Reed is a wonderful place, and we would take great care of you. So nice meeting you.
And I'll just say that Portland is a wonderful place.
Yeah.
I'll add to that. But if you do have any questions about econ or any of the associated econ things, we didn't talk about ICPS, we didn't talk about environmental studies. I'm happy to talk to you about any of that sort of stuff. Environmental studies is actually going to be doing something on Friday, so you should go talk to them. But you know, this is a big community. For a very small school, it's a very big community. And I think that's a good combination that we have.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.